Hey, what is up, you sexy beast? Old Tristan here, and I am bringing you scary stories. This is Christmas edition. I just wanted to wish everyone a Merry Christmas or whatever holidays they celebrate. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and I'm gonna get right into a just published Christmas tale, you guys, and it's actually pretty creepy. I really hope you guys do enjoy. Don't forget to leave a like if you guys do enjoy. I'm gonna get right into it. He first suspected that they were going to eat him when he noticed a distinct lack of Yuletide smells. It wasn't perhaps a conscious thought, at least not when he had been fully released, but there was a clear growing uneasiness within him. Somehow, he just knew. Surely, if a family invited you for Christmas dinner, the house would be filled with wonderful aromas associated with that annual feast. Succulent roast chicken, honey glazed vegetables, perhaps the fume of mulled wine or a brandy-covered Christmas pudding. But no, all of those were absent, yet the table was set. It was a particularly bleak Christmas, and while snow was often welcome at the festive time of year, the penetrating cold and frost which seemed to sabotage both homes and their residents' bodies was not. The temperature had plummeted on the 7th, and there had been little signs of any forthcoming reprieve. Families attempted as best they could to reach one another, but for many it was a lonely Christmas day. Travel, especially for the elderly, was almost impossible for fear of slipping on ice. One fall was all it could take in order to get a broken hip or shoulder, and for the more fragile individuals amongst them, recovering from such an injury was not an easy task, certainly not as easy as it would have been for all the younger vintage. The Cardinal family had taken pity for an elderly gentleman who had recently moved into a neighborhood only a few streets away. They were of an upstanding stock and took part in a local help home initiative, spending time with old and vulnerable. Everybody knew and loved them. Timmy was the youngest, a boy of 5 or 6. He was a boy whom all looked up to with great adoration, never complaining, never causing trouble, always adorable, and his 10-year-old sister, Camilla, was equally as admired. They were both a testament to the caring and nurturing parent skills of Ben and Lucy Cardinal. Each year, as the cold winter drew in, the Cardinal family were admired for their decoration and commitment to those around them. Their passion, almost zeal for helping those who were less fortunate, but behind the smiles of skin-faced deep facade of that loving family lurked a far more sinister purpose. They had a tradition each year, a way to reward themselves for their kindness and generosity, one which stemmed back through many previous generations of the Cardinal family. Each Christmas, they would invite a guest for dinner and who would be welcomed with open arms into their home. Sat down at a beautifully set table, provided with humorous and enjoyable Christmas conversation. But then, as the light of the roaring fire, the guests would be stabbed to death and eaten gratefully. They all reveled in the old tradition, with Timmy looking forward to it the most. He had a ferocious appetite and a waistline to match it. But children do not get so wrapped up in the anticipation of their family Christmas, and his parents were delighted to see a growing boy fill his belly. Camilla was one of the more quiet dispositions than her stout little brother, slight of figure with a pallid complexion which reminded all of her mother. But make no mistake, she adored eating with the family and could render anyone silent with a sharp, cold insult. Ben was a local police chief for the area, so covering up their annual feast was quite a cinch. While Lucy was, well, shall we say, a relation of sorts, was entirely enthusiastic about maintaining the Christmas tradition. Their guests were invariably those without family, and often of ripe old age, forgotten by society, left to wither in their isolated little houses. Ben explained to the children yearly that it was almost a kindness to put the victims out of their slowly increasing misery, and besides, when they did eventually die, they'd be shoved into a box into the ground or roasted into ashes. Waste of good meat. This year, Timmy and Camilla were especially excited. It was all their mother could do to calm their nerves, but on that Christmas Eve, it was nearly impossible, for they knew the special treat they were in for the following Christmas Day. The Cardinals were hosting a most special guest. His name was Sergei Moraru, and he'd hailed from Eastern Europe. They had never had foreign meat before, and the very idea of tearing into some delicious exotic muscle and fat made this year's feast something to really look forward to. They had met Old Man Moraru just a few weeks earlier when Ben had noticed the unusual name on his home help list. Each year, as Christmas approached, the volunteers of the local church would be given names and addresses of pensioners in the area who had no family and would be left quiet and alone over the holiday season. At the festive time of year, and worried that many of the frailer residents might succumb to the biting cold, church committee members would visit each of these lonely individuals and offer a friendly ear, a helping hand, and sometimes some hearty food to the poorest of those on the list. The names would rarely change, but at least one person on that list would sadly pass away that year. Being an upstanding member of the community and a high-ranking police officer in the area, Ben would often inform the church that they had one in their flock had sadly passed away. With no friends or known family, he would concoct a lie that usually involved the long son lost her daughter, appearing to take their sadly departed parents somehow far away to be buried. That, or he would say that they had simply moved, having a bit to deal with in a local estate agent and solicitor's firm to throw the proceeds from any property sales their way. The families were not without influence. It was incredible how little people questioned this, but as the Cardinals ensured that each Christmas meal was not an active member in the church or community, people just assumed that Ben knew best. This year, the Cardinals had hoping to invite Lucy Rindage around for her Christmas swan song, but unfortunately she had died during the summer. Ben had investigated and he suspected that an intruder had been inside the house with her at the time of her death, but it seemed as though the causes were natural. No, the family would have to have someone different for dinner. Then the name appeared on the list. Sergey Mararu, age 86, slight emphysema, no family. No one knows him in the area and he recently moved here. Perfect. Ben found Mr. Mararu to be an absolute delight. While he was obviously very frail, his mind was still sharp and he had been regaled Ben with numerous colorful stories about the old country and the adventures he had while he was a full bloom of youth. Of particular interest were his wartime stories, and Ben was thrilled to know that their main course could be that of an intelligent, well-traveled man. He even looked unlike any previous victims. He was quite tall, slightly hunched with his age, and a long crooked nose and intense stare. Ben fancied that in his youth Mararu would have been quite intimidating. His kind smile and obviously fragile frame, however, left Ben in no doubt that the kids would love him. They enjoyed eating those with character and a gentle disposition. He always enjoyed the meat more if it had been kind and was out of the ordinary. As the family religion, one may have managed to stay unseen yet influential throughout the centuries, stated that eating of another human being would transmit some of the strengths to those whom devoured it. As with many of those who can look into the past rather than into the future, Surugu Mararu enjoyed the company greatly. He was touched with Ben inviting him to sit in the family Christmas table. The old man was extremely frail and required the assistance of both Ben and Camilla to help him in and out of Ben's car and then into the house. His emphysema was particularly bad that day, as each step was accompanied by a wheezing, fluid-filled sounds of struggling lungs. Each room of the Cardinal house was draped in a multicolored selection of rather crass Christmas decorations, with numerous cards adorning every visible table and mantelpiece showcasing just how popular Ben and his family really were. The table was beautifully laid with a red cotton cloth resting underneath an elegant cream dining set. The old man found that the rest of Ben's family were just as pleasant and congenial as he was. Timmy and Camilla were the kinds of well-behaved kids, helping the frail old man to his chair carefully, and then waiting on him, topping up his drink as their mother and father busied themselves in the kitchen. Finally, Lucy appeared carrying a huge centerpiece plate. It was unusually large, and she set it in the middle of the table. Empty and devoid of food, old man Mararu caught a look on Lucy's face. It was brief, and he immediately attempted to disregard it as a product of his imagination. But it unsettled him deeply. It was as if a private joke had passed between the eyes of Lucy and her children. A flicker of a grin, but not one of the kindness or of Christmas spirit, but rather one resembling that of a conspiratorial bully, as if Suragu was the unwitting recipient of some unwholesome prank, waiting to be ridiculed. Just as the unease began to diminish, Ben appeared with a large jagged carving knife and a long two-pronged fork, which reminded Sergio much of the butcher's implement cut a decent-sized turkey. A turkey which became increasingly conspicuous by its absence. They sat there for over an hour, each member of the Cardinal family replenishing the old man's drink with their enthusiasm and showing concern for every and each cough or moment of uncomfortable breathing experienced by their guest. But it was a strange concern. There, they sat gleefully, asking Muraru questions and then listening to the stories and answers which came about his life, where he had moved, how many battles he had fought in. But the interest and concern seemed to be more distant somehow. It was only skin deep. Each time their guest mentioned the old country, those same conspiracy-laden glances were traded across the table, as if excited, not by the content of the stories, but rather by the simple fact that Muraru was a foreigner. The absence of not only food, but that there was not even mere mention of it, was unsettling enough. But what was more perplexing was that Ben repeatedly stole looks towards an antique clock which sat on the mantelpiece above the fire. Looks were poorly hidden and betrayed their purpose. He was counting down the minutes to some event, while the old man had no idea what the event was. The certainty was apparent that it was not connected to anything cooking in the kitchen oven. Muraru knew that there had simply been no food roasted, grilled, or even cooled on the window ledge nearby. Whatever was being planned, it was not going to involve him eating a Christmas meal. It was Camilla who stopped smiling at his first anecdotes and historical observations. She had ceased listening. No longer was she politely laughing at obvious jokes and the endearing sight of an old man repeating himself through forgetfulness. Camilla was simply staring at those pinpoint, cold, dark eyes, as a snake before a strike. Timmy was next to abandon the act as he began to grin menacingly at Sergio. As his hands gripped a small serrated steak knife intensively, the most alarming thing was about the focus of Timmy's stare was not on the old man's face, but on his wrinkled neck. With one last glance at the clock, Ben ceased being the jovial, attentive host and began to run his fingers along the huge carving knife in front of him, with a mixture of anger and lust upon his face. Sergio had seen many things in his time, but nothing as surprising and strange and unnerving as this. Finally, when the clock began to chime, Lucy relinquished her false, endearing smile and exposed the cold-hearted and twisted personality which lay beneath. As the chimes slowly rang throughout the house, one by one, echoing and lonely and piercing in their symbolism, each of the cardinals rose up from their chairs, sharp, jagged knives in hands, and waited. The chime rang once, and they uttered an indecipherable phrase in unison. The chime rang twice, and they increased their cult-like chorus in ferocity and volume. The chime rang 3 times, and they stopped. All were silent, but the house devoid of sound, Christmas spirit, and that of hope. The old man's wheezing grew in intensity as the uniquely bizarre sight of the twisted family about to dine dawned upon Sergio. The family then quietly and efficiently walked around the dining table and stood motionless, surrounding their guest. Just as the old man was about to inquire what was to become of him, the clock of the mantelpiece burst into life one final time. The chime was different from the others. It was sharper, somehow fouler, and echoed once and once only throughout the cardinal home. From behind, Lucy slit the old man's throat from ear to ear as Ben thrust his carving knife deep into Sergio's stomach. Both parents then removed their knives and stood back, watching with pride as Camilla cut and stabbed repeatedly, while Timmy thrust his steak knife in and out of Muraru's legs, neck, and arms. After a few minutes, the frenzy diminished as both children grew tired. With one last downward thrust, Timmy drove a steak knife so deeply into the old man's hand that it skewered it completely, embedding itself into the table of which the hand rested. The children now ran to their parents' collective embrace. They hugged and rejoiced in what a fantastic Christmas game they had just had, and now they could look forward with delight to some succulent, exotic meat. Arms wrapped around one another, they stared at their victim and began to laugh loudly, commenting on the old fool stories of time gone by, the war, and the old country. As they turned to each other once more, the laughter diminished because they had now looked into each other's rosy, blood-covered faces and shared a family moment. This had been one of Ben's favorite sacrifices. But the laughter had not completely ceased. One person was still laughing loudly. Confusion turned to abject horror as a bizarre truth revealed itself. It was Mr. Muraru, still covered in blood, his head tilted back and the deep cut in his throat wide open. The dinner guests laughed loud and strong, a laugh which was both young and old. His head ached forward, and he pulled Timmy's steak knife out of his hand, dropping it on the floor. Camilla screamed, and Lucy hid behind Ben, which they thought to be a corpse now stared at all of them, as they had stared at it with a singular purpose. Timmy began to pee himself and cry as two previously retracted fangs cracked through the old man's upper gum, revealing a serrated and terrifying grin. As he rose to his feet, Lucy fainted, and with both hunch and old age now gone, the Cardinal's guest loomed tall and dark before them, his eyes piercing, telling tales of countries and decades and the centuries of existence. Surumagaru ate well that Christmas. I really hope you guys did enjoy this story. This is fresh off the CreepyPasta floor. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you guys, what do you guys want to do for like the gameplay and stuff? I honestly have no idea. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was gonna do horror gameplay, but I just don't have any right now, and I just wanted to wish you guys a Merry Christmas, but I didn't want to put a photo up, so please let me know what I should do. Don't forget to leave this story a like if you guys did enjoy the story. It's not so much about the gameplay. I'll figure that part out. Have a great day, and remember the fact that I love you. Merry Christmas, guys.